The coffee burned my tongue, bitter, scalding, exactly how I'd always taken it before I learned better. Steam rose from the chipped ceramic mug, carrying with it the smell of over-roasted beans and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Burnt sugar, maybe, or regret. The kitchen tiles were cold beneath my bare feet, each one a small square of shock that traveled up through my ankles and settled somewhere in my chest. Through the window above the sink, morning light cut across the countertop in bars of gold and shadow. Dust motes swirled in the illuminated spaces, tiny galaxies spinning in their own orbits, indifferent to gravity or intention. I watched them, transfixed, while the coffee cooled in my hands and the refrigerator hummed its monotonous song. The clock on the microwave blinked 6:47 a.m. Tuesday, March 15th. March 15th. My fingers tightened around the mug. The ceramic was cheap, the kind that absorbed heat too quickly and left your palms feeling raw. I'd bought this mug at a dollar store 3 years ago. Would buy it, I corrected myself, and used it every morning until the handle broke off in my hand one rushed morning when I was already late for work. That wouldn't happen for another 26 months. I knew this the way I knew my own name, the way I knew the exact number of steps from this kitchen to the front door. 17. The way I knew that if I opened the refrigerator right now, I'd find expired milk that Diane would use anyway for her coffee, insisting it was still fine. Diane. The name settled over me like a physical weight. My sister. Older by 3 years, older by a lifetime of confidence I'd never quite managed to cultivate. Upstairs, her alarm would go off in exactly 4 minutes. She'd hit snooze twice before finally dragging herself out of bed, stumbling to the bathroom with her eyes still half closed, already rehearsing whatever speech she'd prepared for me this morning. Something about responsibility, something about family obligations, something about how I needed to get my act together and stop being such a burden. I'd heard these speeches before. I would hear them again. The coffee was cool enough to drink now. I took a sip and tasted nothing but bitterness and a strange metallic tang that might have been the water or might have been my own tongue, still adjusting to this body that was mine, but also somehow not quite mine. Younger, softer around the edges. Missing the scar on my left wrist from the accident that hadn't happened yet. Wouldn't happen this time if I had anything to say about it. My phone, an iPhone 8 with a cracked screen I'd meant to replace for months, sat face down on the counter where I'd left it last night. This morning. Whatever. Time felt liquid now, running in multiple directions at once, pooling in places it shouldn't. I picked it up and felt the familiar weight of it, lighter than the phones I'd grown used to in those last years, the ones with cameras that could see in the dark and batteries that lasted 2 days. 3 missed calls, all from Marcus. Marcus Caldwell. My husband. The man who would, in approximately 7 months, ask for a divorce while standing in this very kitchen, his hand on this very counter, his eyes on everything except my face. The man who was, at this very moment, probably asleep in our apartment across town, his arm thrown across the empty space where I should be, unaware that I'd driven here last night after the dinner that had gone so wrong, the dinner where Diane had smiled her sharp smile and suggested that maybe it was time Marcus and I thought seriously about our financial situation. That dinner had been the beginning of the end, the first time, the domino that started everything falling. This time, I hadn't stayed for dessert. The stairs creaked, the third one from the top, which Diane kept meaning to fix but never did. Her footsteps crossed the floor above my head, moving from bedroom to bathroom. The pipes groaned as she turned on the shower. In 20 minutes, she'd come downstairs in her gray pantsuit, the one she wore to important meetings. So her hair still damp at the ends. Her perfume, something floral and expensive that our mother had worn, arriving in the kitchen 30 seconds before she did. I set down my phone and picked up the stack of mail on the counter instead. Bills mostly, a credit card offer addressed to current resident, a postcard from our aunt in Florida showing a sunset over a beach I'd never visit, and beneath it all, a thick cream envelope with my name written in elegant script across the front. Catherine Hartley, not Catherine Caldwell, not yet. This envelope had arrived yesterday, 6 days before Marcus and I were supposed to get married. 6 days before I was supposed to stand in a church with borrowed flowers and a borrowed dress and promise forever to a man who would spend our entire marriage resenting me for not being whoever he'd imagined I'd become. I knew what was inside the envelope. I'd opened it before, in that other timeline, with shaking hands and a sinking feeling in my stomach. My grandmother's attorney, following the instructions she'd left before her death, had sent me the formal documents establishing a trust in my name. $2 million, carefully invested, meant to be mine when I turned 30. In that other life, I'd shown the letter to Marcus. He'd smiled and suggested we pool our resources, that we were going to be married anyway, that it made sense to combine everything. I'd agreed. Of course I'd agreed. I was 24 years old and desperately in love, and convinced that love meant trust meant sharing everything, even the things that were supposed to be yours alone. The trust had been emptied within a year. Investments, Marcus had called them. Opportunities. Business ventures that never quite materialized, real estate deals that fell through, a restaurant that closed 6 months after opening. By the time I'd asked to see the account statements, there was nothing left but debt. And his wounded expression, his voice asking how I could doubt him, how I could be so suspicious. Didn't I trust him? I trusted him. I'd trusted him right up until the moment he'd asked for a divorce, and I'd realized that the trust fund was gone, my savings were gone, everything was gone, and the only thing I had left was this house that Diane was already suggesting we sell, that she'd already picked out a realtor for, that she'd already decided would be split 60-40, because after all, she'd been taking care of it while I was playing house with Marcus. The envelope felt heavier than it should. Paper and ink shouldn't weigh this much. I didn't open it. Instead, I carried it to the sink and held it over the drain. The morning light caught on the cream paper, making it glow. One match, I thought, one match and it would all go away. The temptation, the knowledge, the entire future that I'd already lived through once and had no intention of living through again. But I didn't light a match. I tucked the envelope into the pocket of my robe instead, a faded blue thing with coffee stains down the front that I'd had since college, and turned back to my phone. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 voicemails, 1 text, "Call me. We need to talk about last night." Last night, the dinner at Diane's house. The conversation that had turned so subtly I'd almost missed it, from wedding planning to finances to Diane's casual comment that Marcus seemed like such a practical man. And wasn't it wonderful that he was so good with money? The way she'd looked at him when she said it, like she was offering him something, the way he'd looked back. I'd left before coffee. Diane had been mid-sentence. Something about how young couples these days needed to be smart about combining assets, and I'd stood up from the table and announced I had a headache. Marcus had started to protest, but I was already getting my coat, already heading for the door, already feeling like I couldn't breathe in that dining room with its expensive wallpaper and its chandelier that cost more than my car, and Diane's voice talking about my money like it was a problem that needed solving. The shower shut off upstairs. Diane would be down soon. I deleted Marcus's voicemails without listening to them. The text I left unanswered. Instead, I opened my email. The old one, the Gmail account I'd set up in high school and had meant to abandon once I got a more professional address, but never quite had. Buried beneath the spam and the promotional emails and the newsletters I'd never read was a message I'd sent to myself 3 years ago, in those first delirious weeks after Marcus proposed, when I'd been so certain that everything was going to be perfect. The subject line read, "Just in case." I'd forgotten about this email. Or rather, I'd forgotten that I'd sent it in this timeline. In the other one, I'd never remembered it existed until it was too late, until I was sitting in a lawyer's office trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from nothing, and even then it hadn't mattered because the damage was done. But here, now, with my finger hovering over the screen, I remembered. I opened it. The message was short. "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. Don't panic. Check the file. Trust yourself." Attached was a PDF. I downloaded it, my heart beating faster now, my coffee forgotten on the counter. The file opened with the sharp sound of digital pages turning. And there it was, a screenshot of an account balance. Not the trust fund, something else, something I'd set up years ago, back when I was 19 and working 3 jobs to pay for community college, back when every dollar felt precious and saving felt like breathing. The account balance showed $47,823.19. I stared at it. That wasn't right. That couldn't be right. I'd closed this account when Marcus and I got married, transferred everything into our joint account like he'd suggested, hadn't I? But looking at the date on the screenshot, March 14th last year, I realized, not yet. I hadn't closed it yet. This account still existed, sitting in a credit union across town, still accumulating interest, still holding every penny I'd scraped together before Marcus convinced me that separate accounts meant I didn't trust him. $47,000. Plus the trust fund that no one except the lawyer knew about yet. Plus, and here was where my hands started shaking, the other accounts. The ones I'd opened in that other life, in those last desperate years when I was trying to claw my way back to stability. The ones I'd funded with freelance work and side jobs and every spare dollar I could hide from the creditors Marcus had left me with. Those accounts didn't exist yet. But they could. Upstairs, Diane's hairdryer roared to life. I had maybe 10 minutes before she came down, before the morning routine began, before she started in on whatever speech she'd prepared about responsibility and family and how I needed to think about the future. I was thinking about the future. I was thinking about it more clearly than I'd ever thought about anything in my life. I pulled out a pen from the drawer where Diane kept them, next to the scissors and the rubber bands and the expired coupons she'd never use. The notepad advertising a local realtor went into my other hand, and I started writing. Account #1, credit union, $47,823.19. Do not close. Do not mention to Marcus. Do not mention to Diane. Account #2, trust fund, $2, 000,000. Do not open the envelope in front of anyone. Do not tell Marcus. Do not tell Diane. Wait until after... I paused. After what? After the wedding that wasn't going to happen? But after the marriage that was already over before it began? I crossed out the line and started again. Account #2, trust fund, $2, 000,000. Open separate account. Transfer immediately upon receipt. Tell no one. Account #3. But there was no account #3. Not yet. Not in this timeline. The hairdryer shut off. Diane's footsteps crossed the floor above me, heading back to her bedroom. 5 minutes. Maybe less. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket with the envelope. The coffee had gone completely cold now, a thin film forming on the surface like ice on a pond. I poured it down the drain and rinsed the mug, my hands moving through the familiar motions while my mind raced ahead, planning, calculating, remembering. In the other timeline, I'd been so naive, so trusting, so convinced that love meant sacrifice and sacrifice meant giving up everything, my savings, my autonomy, my grandmother's gift, because that's what you did when you built a life with someone. You combined. You merged. You became we instead of I. But we had turned into he, so gradually I'd barely noticed. And by the time I did notice, there was no I left to return to. The stairs creaked again. Diane's perfume preceded her into the kitchen, that floral scent our mother had worn, the one that always made me feel like I was 12 years old and being scolded for tracking mud through the house. She appeared in the doorway in her gray pantsuit, her hair smooth, her expression already arranged into something between concern and disappointment. "You're up early," she said, her eyes taking in my robe, my bare feet, the empty mug in my hand. "Couldn't sleep?" Something like that. She moved past me to the coffee maker, her heels clicking on the tile. Click, click, click. Each step a small, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator opened. The milk came out. Expired, just like I knew it would be. But Diane didn't check the date. She never did. The coffee poured dark and steaming into her travel mug, the good one with the lid that never leaked. "I wanted to talk to you about last night," she said, her back still to me. "You left so suddenly." I had a headache. Marcus was worried. Marcus can call me if he's worried. She turned then, her expression sharpening into something more focused. This was the Diane I remembered from that other life, the one who'd been there for the divorce, who'd helped me pack up the apartment, who'd driven me back to this house and then 3 months later started suggesting we sell it. Helpful, concerned, always thinking about what was best for me in a way that somehow always ended up being best for her. "Catherine," she said, and her voice was gentle now, which was somehow worse than when it was sharp. "I know you love him, but you have to think practically. Marriage is a partnership, and that means being smart about money. You can't just keep everything separate and expect it to work. Why not? The question seemed to surprise her. Her coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. Why can't I keep things separate? I asked again. People do it all the time. Married people, I mean. They have their own accounts, their own savings. It doesn't mean they don't trust each other. Of course it doesn't, Diane said. But her tone suggested she thought exactly the opposite. But Marcus seems like the kind of man who wants a real partnership, the kind where you build something together. We can build something together without combining bank accounts. Can you? She set down her mug. The sound it made on the counter was louder than it should have been, a small punctuation mark in the conversation. Catherine, I'm trying to help you. You don't have a lot of experience with money. I have $47,000 in savings. The words came out before I could stop them. Sharp and defensive and entirely too revealing. Diane's eyebrows rose. You do? Too late now to take it back. Yes. From what? Your job at the library pays barely above minimum wage. I've had other jobs. Before the library, I saved. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then, does Marcus know? Why would Marcus need to know? Because you're getting married, Catherine. Because that's what couples do. They share this information. I felt something hard and cold settle in my chest, something that felt like the certainty I'd been missing in that other life, when I'd been younger and softer and so desperate to be loved that I'd given away everything that mattered. We're not married yet, but you will be in less than a week. 6 days. 6 days until I was supposed to walk down an aisle and promise forever to a man who, in the other timeline, had spent our entire marriage pulling away from me in increments so small I'd barely noticed until the distance between us was a canyon I couldn't cross. Maybe we should postpone, I heard myself say. So, Diane's expression shifted from surprise to something sharper, more alert. What? The wedding? Maybe we should wait. Wait for what? I didn't have an answer. How could I explain that I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to navigate this second chance without making the same mistakes? How could I tell her that I'd already lived through this marriage and watched it crumble, that I knew exactly how it ended because I'd been there? I'd experienced every painful moment, every small betrayal, every time Marcus looked at me with that expression that said I wasn't quite what he'd hoped for. Catherine, Diane's voice had gone soft again, dangerous in its gentleness. Are you having second thoughts? I just think, because if you are, you need to say so now. Marcus has been patient with you. Yeah, he's been understanding about your situation. My situation? Code for my lack of money, my lack of prospects, my lack of whatever it was that made someone worthy of a man like Marcus Caldwell, with his business degree and his family connections, and his way of making you feel like you should be grateful he'd chosen you. What situation? I asked. You know what I mean. I really don't. She sighed, the sound carrying all the weight of her 3 years' seniority, all the accumulated frustration of a lifetime of being the responsible one, the successful one, the one who'd figured out how life worked while I was still stumbling around in the dark. You don't have a career. You're working part-time at a library. You're living in our mother's house because you can't afford your own place. Marcus is offering you stability. And you're talking about postponing the wedding because of what? Cold feet? The words should have stung. In that other timeline, they would have hit right where they were aimed, at that soft, vulnerable place where my insecurities lived, and I would have apologized and backed down and convinced myself that she was right, that I was being foolish, that I should be grateful for Marcus's patience and understanding. But I'd already lived through grateful. I'd already experienced what happened when you built a life on the foundation of someone else's generosity. And I'd learned, in the hardest way possible, that gratitude was a poor substitute for autonomy. I'm not having cold feet, I said. I'm having concerns. About what? About everything. About the way Marcus had looked at Diane last night when she mentioned combining assets. About the trust fund envelope in my pocket that felt like both a gift and a burden. About the fact that I was standing in my dead mother's kitchen having a conversation I'd already had once before. Except this time, I knew how it ended and I had the power to change it. About moving too fast, I finally said. Diane picked up her coffee mug again, took a sip, made a face. The milk had been expired longer than she'd realized, and set it back down. You've been engaged for 10 months. And that's not very long in the scheme of things. It's long enough to know if you want to marry someone. Is it? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker across her face that might have been concern or might have been calculation. With Diane, it was always hard to tell. She'd learned from our mother how to weaponize care, how to make every suggestion sound like it was for your own good, even when it served her interests more than yours. "What's really going on?" she asked. I could have told her. I could have said, "I've already lived this life, and it doesn't end well." I could have said, "I know things I shouldn't know. Remember things that haven't happened yet, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this second chance without losing myself again." But I didn't, because some truths are too strange to speak aloud, and some knowledge is too dangerous to share. "I just need time," I said instead. "Time for what?" "To think. You've had 10 months to think. And now I need more." Diane's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, frowned. "I have to go. I have a meeting at 8. She grabbed her coat from the hook by the door, her purse from the counter. "But Catherine, we're going to talk about this tonight. Don't make any decisions until we've talked." Don't make any decisions? As if the decision wasn't already made, as if I hadn't already lived through the alternative and watched it destroy everything I'd worked for. "Fine," I said. She paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. "And, Catherine, call Marcus. Whatever you're feeling, he deserves to know." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click, her car starting in the driveway, the sound of it fading as she pulled onto the street. I stood in the kitchen listening to the silence she left behind, feeling the weight of the envelope in my pocket, and the list of accounts I'd written, and the knowledge of everything that was coming, and everything I could prevent if I was smart enough, strong enough, careful enough. The morning light had shifted, the dust motes had settled, my coffee mug sat in the sink, empty and forgotten. I pulled out my phone and opened the browser. Then I typed, "How to open an anonymous LLC in Pennsylvania." The results loaded slowly. Internet was slower in this time. I'd forgotten that. But when they came, I read them carefully, taking notes, planning, thinking about the future in a way I'd never quite managed before, when the future had seemed so uncertain and I'd been so convinced that the only way forward was to hold onto someone else's hand and hope they didn't let go. This time, I would hold on to myself. This time, I would build something that no one could take away. This time, I would be ready. The credit union was on Maple Street, tucked between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop I'd never visited. The building was older than the businesses around it. Red brick with white trim that needed repainting, a small parking lot in back that always seemed half empty. I'd opened my first account here at 19, back when the idea of saving money felt revolutionary, back when every deposit slip felt like a small victory against a world that seemed designed to keep people like me poor. Inside, the air smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. The teller stations were quiet at this hour, just after 9 on a Tuesday morning. Too early for the lunch rush, too late for the before-work crowd. A woman with gray hair and reading glasses looked up from her computer as I approached, her smile professional and practiced. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I need to check my account balance," I said, "and I want to make some changes to my account settings." "Of course. I'll just need your ID." I handed over my driver's license, 3 years left until it expired, the photo showing a younger version of myself that looked like a stranger now. The teller typed something into her computer, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. "Account ending in 7,823. That's the one. Your current balance is $47,823.19. The number hit differently, hearing it spoken aloud, confirmed, made real. In my pocket, my fingers found the note I'd written that morning, the list of accounts that existed and didn't exist. The careful architecture I was trying to build. "I want to remove someone from my authorized users list," I said. The teller looked up, her expression neutral. "Who did you want to remove?" In the other timeline, I'd added Marcus 2 weeks before our wedding. "Just in case," he'd said. "In case something happens and you need me to access funds." I'd thought it was practical. I'd thought it was what couples did. I'd thought it meant something about trust and partnership and building a life together. It had meant something, all right. It had meant that when things fell apart and the creditors started calling and I'd needed that account more than I'd ever needed anything, Marcus had already emptied it to pay for his investments. "Marcus Caldwell?" I said. "But actually, I don't think he's on the account yet." The teller checked her screen. No, you're right. There are no additional authorized users. Did you want to add someone?" "No," I said. "I want to make sure no one can be added without my explicit permission. In person, with 2 forms of ID." She blinked. "That's not a standard request." "Can you do it?" I'd have to talk to the manager." "Then let's talk to the manager." The manager was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested he took his role very seriously. His name tag read, David Chen, Branch Manager. He listened to my request with his hands folded on his desk, his expression thoughtful. "You want to lock down your account," he said when I'd finished explaining. "I want to make sure that only I can make changes to it, that no one can be added as an authorized user, that no one can access the funds, that no one can even see the balance unless I'm physically present with multiple forms of identification." "That's unusual? Is it illegal?" "No, it's just most people want to make their accounts more accessible, not less." "What if there's an emergency?" "Then I'll handle it." He studied me for a moment, and I wondered what he saw. A young woman in jeans and a sweater, sitting in his office first thing on a Tuesday morning, asking to lock down an account with almost $50,000 in it. Paranoid? Suspicious? Smart? "May I ask why?" he said finally. I could have told him it was none of his business. I could have stood up and walked out and taken my money to a different bank, one that wouldn't ask questions, but something in his expression suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment, and I found myself wanting to be honest, or at least as honest as I could be without sounding insane. "I'm getting married," I said. "Soon, and I want to make sure this account stays separate. Mine, not ours, not his, not community property or joint assets or whatever you call it. Just mine." Understanding flickered across his face. "You're protecting yourself. I'm being practical. There are better ways to do this. A prenuptial agreement, for instance." "I want this too." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll need you to sign some forms. And I'm going to set up a password on your account, something beyond the standard security questions. Every time you want to make a change, you'll need to provide that password in person. Can you do that?" "Yes." "And you understand that this means even you will have limited remote access?" "Oh, no online banking, no phone banking, nothing that could potentially be compromised?" "I understand." "Okay then." He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer, selected several forms. "Let's set this up." We spent the next hour going through paperwork, signatures and initials and checkboxes, a password that I chose carefully, something no one would guess, something that had meaning only to me. The date my grandmother died, combined with the name of the street she'd lived on, scrambled into a nonsense word that would have defeated any hacker, but was burned into my memory like a brand. When it was done, David Chen handed me a folder with copies of everything I'd signed. "Your account is now what we call maximum security. The only person who can access it is you, in person, with government-issued ID and your password. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I hesitated. The trust fund envelope was still in my bag, unopened, waiting. If I wanted to open a second account, a completely separate account not connected to this one at all, could I do that? Of course. What kind of account? The same kind. Maximum security, but this one would be for larger amounts. His eyebrows rose slightly. How much larger? "Around $2 million. The room went very quiet. David Chen set down his pen and looked at me with new attention, the kind of attention people pay when they realize they've underestimated someone. "That's significantly larger. I know. We can absolutely set up that account for you, but for an amount that size, you might want to consider other options. Money market accounts, CDs, investment portfolios. The interest rate on a standard savings account won't—" "I just want it safe," I interrupted. "I can think about investments later. Right now, I just need somewhere to put it where no one else can touch it." He studied me for another long moment. Then he pulled out more paperwork. "Let's set it up." By the time I left the credit union, it was nearly 11. The sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, turning the March day into something almost spring-like. I sat in my car in the parking lot with the folder of account documents in my lap and the envelope from my grandmother's lawyer still unopened in my bag, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not power exactly, not confidence, but something simpler and more fundamental. The knowledge that I had options, that I had resources, that whatever came next, I wouldn't be helpless the way I'd been before. My phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. "Where are you? We need to talk." I started to type a response, then stopped. What would I say? That I was at a bank locking down my accounts before he could access them? That I was planning to call off our wedding because I'd already lived through our marriage and knew it didn't work? That I'd woken up this morning with memories of a future that hadn't happened yet, and I was trying to rewrite it? Instead, I opened my email and searched for the financial advisor I'd worked with in that other timeline, the one who'd helped me rebuild after Marcus left. Her name was Patricia Joe, and she'd been patient and thorough, and had never once made me feel stupid for the mistakes I'd made. In this timeline, I'd never met her. But her firm's website still existed, her contact information still listed. I wrote, "Dear Miss Joe, I'm looking for someone to help me manage a significant inheritance. I need someone discreet, someone who understands the importance of confidentiality, and someone who can help me set up structures to protect these assets long term. Would you be available for a consultation?" I hit send before I could second guess myself. Then I finally opened the envelope from my grandmother's lawyer. The letter inside was exactly as I remembered it. Formal, typed on heavy paper, explaining in careful legal language that my grandmother had established a trust for me before her death, that the funds were to be released on my 30th birthday unless the trustees, her lawyer and her accountant, deemed that I needed them earlier for education, medical expenses, or what they called significant life changes. Marriage qualified as a significant life change. In the other timeline, I'd called the lawyer immediately, excited and nervous and so grateful that my grandmother had thought of me, that she'd left me this gift. The lawyer had been kind and efficient, walking me through the paperwork, helping me understand the tax implications, setting up the transfer. And then I'd told Marcus and he'd smiled, and 3 months later, the money was gone. This time, I read the letter 3 times before I even took out my phone. This time, I Googled irrevocable trusts and asset protection and how to keep an inheritance separate in marriage. This time, I took pictures of every page of the document, uploading them to a new email account I'd created that morning, one that only I knew about, one that had a password no one could guess. And then I called the lawyer. His name was Robert Morrison, and his secretary put me through immediately when I gave my name. His voice was warm, professional, exactly as I remembered it from that other timeline when I'd been younger and more naive and so certain that everything would work out. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I've been expecting your call. Did you receive the documents?" "I did." "And do you have questions?" "Several. But first, I need to know something. This trust. Can anyone else access it? My husband, for instance, if I get married?" To pause. "The trust is in your name only. However, once the funds are distributed to you, they become your personal assets. In Pennsylvania, depending on how you structure things. See, marital property laws could potentially... So, if I keep it in a separate account, in my name only, and never commingle the funds with joint accounts or joint assets, it stays separate?" "Generally speaking, yes, but I'd recommend you speak with a family law attorney if you're concerned about..." "I'm concerned," I said. "I'm very concerned. And I want to make sure that this money stays protected no matter what happens." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Hartley, are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, I'm trying to avoid trouble." "I see." His tone had changed, become more focused. "In that case, I'd strongly recommend we set up the distribution differently. Rather than transferring the funds directly to your personal account, we could establish a limited liability company in your name. The trust would distribute the funds to the LLC, and you would be the sole member and manager. This creates an additional layer of protection. The assets belong to the company, not to you personally, which means they're not subject to the same community property considerations. An LLC. I'd learned about these in that other timeline. Too late to help with the money that was already gone, but early enough to protect what little I'd managed to scrape back together. How long does that take to set up? A few weeks typically. We'd need to file paperwork with the state, set up a bank account for the LLC, establish operating procedures. But it's not complicated. I can handle most of it for you. And no one else would have access? Not my husband, not my family, no one? You would be the sole member and manager, the only person with access. Let's do it, I said. Well, let's set it up exactly like that. I'll need you to come in to sign some papers. When would be convenient? Today. This afternoon, if possible. That's very quick. Is there a particular reason for the urgency? I thought about Marcus's texts, about Diane's questions that morning, about the wedding that was supposed to happen in 6 days, and the future I was trying to prevent. I'm getting married soon, I said, and I want this settled before then. Ah, understanding in his voice, the same understanding David Chen had shown at the credit union. I see. Well then, let's get you in here this afternoon. Say 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock is perfect. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, from adrenaline, from the strange, intoxicating feeling of taking control of my own life in a way I'd never quite managed before. I checked my email. Patricia Joe had already responded. I'd be happy to meet with you. How does Thursday at 10 a.m. sound? Thursday, 2 days away, 4 days before the wedding. I typed back, perfect, see you then. Then I turned off my phone and drove home, the spring sunlight warm through the windshield, the folder of bank documents safe in my bag, my grandmother's trust letter tucked away with them. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands. The road ahead felt clear. For the first time since I'd woken up in this body, in this timeline, in this second chance at a life I'd already lived through once, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could do this. I could rewrite the future. I could protect myself. I could build something that no one could take away. I just had to be smart enough to see the traps before I stepped into them. Marcus was waiting on my front porch when I got home. He looked exactly as I remembered him from this period. Tall, athletic, in that casual way of men who'd played sports in college and still found time to run every morning, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my entire week's salary. His hair was darker than it would be in a few years, before the stress of his failing business ventures started turning it gray at the temples. His face was unlined, open, wearing an expression of concern that in another timeline would have made me feel guilty for worrying him. This time, I just felt tired. "Hey," he said, standing up as I pulled into the driveway. I was starting to get worried. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, gathering myself. Through the windshield, I watched him come down the porch steps, his gait confident, his hands in his pockets. Every movement familiar, every gesture one I'd seen 1,000 times before in that other life, when I'd been his wife and then his ex-wife, and finally just someone he used to know. "Catherine?" He was at my car door now, tapping on the window. "You okay?" I got out. The folder from the bank went into my bag, hidden beneath my wallet and my grandmother's letter and all the other small paper evidences of the life I was trying to build. "I'm fine. You didn't answer my calls." I know, I needed some time to think. "About what?" But his tone suggested he already knew. His eyes had that cautious look men get when they sense a conversation sliding away from them, when they're calculating how to redirect it back to safer ground. About last night, about what Diane said. Diane was just trying to help. Was she? He reached for my hand. I let him take it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the familiar pressure of his fingers. In another life, this touch had meant safety. Now it just felt like a negotiation. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside and talk about this." Inside, the house still smelled like coffee and Diane's perfume. Marcus followed me into the kitchen, where I'd stood that morning writing my list of accounts, making my plans. The morning felt like it had happened years ago instead of hours. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked, going to the refrigerator automatically, my hands moving through the motions of hospitality while my mind raced ahead, planning what to say, how to say it, which truths to tell, and which to keep hidden. "Just water." I poured 2 glasses. The ice maker rattled as it dispensed cubes, each one dropping into the glass with a hollow sound. Marcus took his glass and set it on the counter without drinking, his attention focused entirely on me. "Talk to me," he said. "What's going on?" Where to start? With the truth that I'd already lived through our marriage and watched it fall apart? That I knew exactly what happened when you built a relationship on combined finances and joint accounts, and the fiction that love meant giving up everything that made you independent, that I'd spent years clawing my way back from the financial devastation he'd left me with. And I had no intention of doing it again? I think we should postpone the wedding, I said. The words dropped into the silence like stones into water, creating ripples that spread outward, changing everything they touched. Marcus's expression shifted. Surprise, then confusion, then something harder to read. Postpone it? We're getting married in 6 days. I know. Everything's planned. The church is booked, your dress is ready, the invitations went out. I know, I said again, but I think we're moving too fast. Too fast? Catherine, we've been engaged for 10 months. And maybe that's not long enough. Not long enough for what? To really know each other. He set down his water glass with more force than necessary. We've known each other for 3 years. Have we? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, carrying with it all the weight of that other timeline when I'd realized too late that the man I'd married was not the man I thought I knew. Or have we just been playing at it, going through the motions? Is this about the money? His voice had changed now, taken on an edge I recognized from that other life. From arguments that would come later, when the investments had failed and the bills were piling up, and he'd accused me of not trusting him, of not believing in him, of caring more about money than about us. It's not about money. It is. Ever since last night, when Diane started talking about finances, you've been weird. Weird how? Distant, like you're calculating something. I almost laughed. Of course I was calculating. I was calculating everything. How much money I had, how much I could protect, how to build a life that no one could take away from me. I was calculating because I'd learned the hard way that love without autonomy was just another word for dependence, and dependence led to disaster. I think, I said carefully, that before we get married, we should talk about expectations, about boundaries, about what we each bring to this relationship and what we want to keep separate. Keep separate. He repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. We're getting married. The whole point is not keeping things separate. Why? What do you mean, why? Why is that the point? Why do we have to combine everything? Why can't we be married and still maintain some independence? Because that's not how marriage works. His voice was rising now, frustration bleeding through. Catherine, I'm trying to build a life with you. A real life. Not some arrangement where we keep score of who owns what and who contributes more. I'm not talking about keeping score. I'm talking about protecting myself. Protecting yourself from what? From me? Yes, I thought. From you. From the version of you that I've already met. The one who will spend our savings on business ventures that fail. Who will empty my accounts to pay for investments that never materialize. Who will look at me 3 years from now with tired eyes and say, this isn't working. Like our marriage was a business deal that didn't pan out. But I couldn't say that. So instead I said, I just think we should be smart about this. Smart about what? About protecting our individual assets. He stared at me for a long moment, then he laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Individual assets? You mean your inheritance? How do you... Diane told me. Last night after you left, she mentioned your grandmother had left you some money, that you'd be getting it soon. Of course she had. Of course Diane had told him. In that other timeline, I'd been the one to tell him, excited and nervous and wanting to share this good news with the man I loved. But Diane telling him felt different, felt calculated, like she was already thinking about how this money could be used, how it could benefit not just me but Marcus, or maybe even her. And, I said, and nothing. I just think it's interesting that you're suddenly worried about protecting yourself right after finding out you're about to inherit a significant amount of money. It's not sudden. Isn't it? Marcus. I set down my water glass and looked at him directly. Trying to find the words that would make him understand without revealing too much. I've worked hard for what little I have. My savings, my independence, they matter to me. And I need to know that when we get married, those things won't disappear into some joint account where I lose track of them. You wouldn't lose track of them. We'd manage them together. Like we'd manage the trust fund together? His expression flickered. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. A beat of silence. Outside, a car passed by, its engine a low rumble that faded into distance. Inside, the refrigerator hummed its endless song. Marcus leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his face arranged into something between hurt and calculation. "So what are you saying?" he asked finally. "What, that you want a prenup?" "Maybe. Maybe." Not exactly enthusiastic. "I'm trying to be practical." "You're trying to build walls. I'm trying to be smart." "About what?" "What are you so afraid is going to happen? Everything." I wanted to say. Everything I've already watched happen once before. Instead, I said, I just think that marriage should be a partnership between equals, not one person absorbing everything the other person has worked for. I never said anything about absorbing. You didn't have to say it, but that's what happens, isn't it? People get married, they combine finances, and somehow one person ends up managing everything while the other person just trusts. And trust is a problem for you. Blind trust is a problem for me. He pushed off from the counter, pacing to the window and back. "This is insane. We're supposed to be getting married in 6 days, and you're talking about prenuptial agreements and separate accounts like we're preparing for a divorce before we even get married. I'm preparing for a partnership. A partnership where you don't trust me with your money. A partnership where I maintain my own financial identity. Those are the same thing, Catherine. You're just using different words." Maybe he was right. Maybe in his mind, trust and combination were inseparable. Maybe for him, the idea of marriage required giving up boundaries, surrendering autonomy, building something new out of the complete dissolution of what came before. But I'd already tried that version of marriage. I'd already lived through what happened when you gave up everything and trusted that love would be enough to protect you. Love hadn't been enough. I think, I said slowly, that we should postpone the wedding until we can figure this out, until we can talk through what we each expect from this marriage and find a way to move forward that works for both of us. Or you could just trust me, or you could respect my need for boundaries. We stared at each other across the kitchen, the morning sunlight casting long shadows on the floor between us. I could see him struggling with it, see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to figure out what to say, how to convince me, what angle might work to bring me back around to the version of our relationship he'd imagined. In that other timeline, this was where I would have folded, where I would have seen his hurt and his confusion and convinced myself that I was being unreasonable, that my fears were groundless, that I should just trust him and trust the process and trust that everything would work out. This time, I stayed silent. "Fine," he said finally. "If you want to postpone the wedding, we'll postpone it. But we're going to talk about this. Really talk about it. Not just you making unilateral decisions about our future." "I agree." "And you're going to explain to me why, after 10 months of being engaged and 3 years of being together, you suddenly don't trust me." "I never said I don't trust you." "You didn't have to." He picked up his water glass, took a long drink, set it back down. "I should go. I have a meeting this afternoon." "Okay." He moved toward the door, then stopped, turning back. "Catherine?" "Yeah?" Is this really about the money? Or is there something else going on? I thought about the trust fund letter in my bag. The bank accounts I'd locked down that morning, the financial advisor I was meeting with on Thursday, the careful architecture of protection I was building, brick by brick, account by account, decision by decision. "It's about making sure I don't lose myself," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Or maybe I'd seen it and never recognized it for what it was. Disappointment, yes. Frustration, certainly, but beneath that, something else. Something that looked almost like calculation, like he was already adjusting his plans, already thinking about what this meant for him, for his future, for the business ventures he'd been planning that would require capital I might no longer be willing to provide. "I'll call you later," he said. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, his footsteps crossing the porch and down to his car. I stood in the kitchen and watched through the window as he drove away, the sunlight glinting off his windshield, turning it into a mirror that reflected nothing but light. When his car disappeared around the corner, I pulled up my phone and called Diane. She answered on the second ring. "Catherine, what's wrong?" "Why did you tell Marcus about the trust fund?" A pause. "What?" "Last night, after I left. You told him about my grandmother's money." Another pause. "I thought he should know." "Why?" "Because you're getting married, and these are things couples should discuss. It wasn't your information to share. Catherine, I was trying to help. Help who? Me or him? That's not fair, isn't it? You've been pushing me to combine finances with Marcus, to be smart about money, to trust him with everything. And now I find out you've been telling him about money I haven't even received yet. So I'll ask again, who are you trying to help? The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, filled with things unsaid. Finally, what's gotten into you? Clarity. About what? About a lot of things. Catherine, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Maybe it should be. What does that mean? I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool surface against my palms, grounding myself. It means I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think I should do. It means I'm going to start making my own choices and living with the consequences. And Marcus and I are postponing the wedding. A sharp intake of breath. You're what? We're postponing it until we can figure some things out. What things? That's between Marcus and me. Catherine, you can't just... I can, I interrupted. And I am. And Diane, I need you to respect that. I need you to stop trying to manage my life and my relationships and my money and let me figure things out on my own. I've never tried to manage. You have. You've been managing me since Mom died, making suggestions, offering advice, always convinced that you know better than I do what I should be doing with my life. And maybe I needed that for a while, but I don't need it anymore. So what do you need? The question hung in the air between us. Oh, I honest and raw in a way that Diane's questions rarely were. I thought about it, really thought about it, trying to find words for this feeling that had been building since I'd woken up in this timeline with knowledge I shouldn't have and a second chance I hadn't asked for. I need space, I said finally. I need room to make my own mistakes and my own decisions. I need to know that the people in my life support me even when they don't understand what I'm doing. And if we can't do that, then I guess we'll figure that out too. Another long silence. Then, okay, I'll back off. But Catherine, I still think you're making a mistake. Maybe I am, but it's my mistake to make. I hope you're right about that. Me too, I said. Me too. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Watching the sunlight shift across the floor, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Everything felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. I'd taken the first steps toward rewriting my future, but I hadn't reached safety yet. There were still so many ways this could go wrong. My phone buzzed. An email from Patricia Joe. Looking forward to meeting Thursday. In the meantime, if you haven't already, I'd recommend speaking with an attorney about asset protection strategies. I can provide referrals if you'd like. I typed back, yes, please send me some names. Then I opened my laptop and started researching prenuptial agreements. What they covered, what they didn't, how to structure one in a way that would protect both parties while still allowing for a genuine partnership. The information was dense, legal, filled with terms I didn't fully understand, but I read it anyway, taking notes, highlighting important passages, building my knowledge brick by brick, because this was what safety looked like now. Not trust, not love, not the hope that everything would work out if you just believed hard enough. Safety looked like preparation, like knowledge, like having options when things fell apart, and things always fell apart eventually. I'd learned that lesson once already. I wasn't eager to learn it again. Robert Morrison's office was in a building downtown, one of those older structures that had been renovated to look modern while maintaining its historical bones. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk where a bored-looking guard checked IDs and called upstairs to announce visitors. The elevator was small and slow, rising with a grinding sound that suggested age despite the polished brass fixtures. Morrison's firm occupied the entire fourth floor. The reception area was tastefully decorated in shades of gray and cream, with artwork that looked expensive but inoffensive. Abstracts that could have meant anything or nothing. A young woman at the desk smiled as I approached, her teeth too white, her makeup too perfect. "Catherine Hartley?" she asked. "Mr. Morrison is expecting you. I'll take you back." His office had a view of the river. I could see the water through the window behind his desk, gray-green and sluggish, reflecting the overcast sky. Morrison stood as I entered, extending his hand. He was older than he'd sounded on the phone, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. "Miss Hartley, please sit." He gestured to the chairs across from his desk, then settled into his own seat with the careful movements of someone managing arthritis or old injuries. "Thank you for coming in. We have quite a bit to discuss." I sat, placing my bag on the floor beside me. Inside it was the letter about the trust fund, the paperwork from the bank, my grandmother's death certificate that I'd needed to bring for the trust disbursement. Everything organized, everything ready. Morrison pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "Your grandmother was very clear about her wishes. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of, but she also wanted to make sure the money was protected. She'd seen too many inheritances squandered." Oh, she told me. She was a practical woman. She was, and she specifically requested that if you showed an interest in protecting these assets, her words, that I should help you in any way I could. He opened the folder. "You mentioned on the phone that you wanted to set up an LLC?" "Yes." "Smart. Very smart, actually. Most people your age just want the money transferred to their personal account as quickly as possible. But an LLC creates a liability shield, keeps the assets separate, makes them harder to reach in the event of—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In the event of various legal complications. Like divorce. Among other things, yes." He walked me through the process, the paperwork we'd need to file, the fees involved, the time it would take. Today, an LLC in Pennsylvania required articles of organization filed with the state, an operating agreement, an employer identification number from the IRS. It sounded complicated, but Morrison assured me his firm could handle all of it. "What we'll do," he said, "is set up the LLC in your name. You'll be the sole member and managing member, which means you have complete control. The trust will then distribute the funds directly to the LLC's bank account rather than to you personally. From a legal standpoint, the money belongs to the company, not to you. But since you control the company, you still have full access to the funds. And in a divorce? Assuming you keep the LLC separate, don't commingle funds with marital assets, don't use it to pay for joint expenses, don't add your spouse as a member. It should remain your separate property. Pennsylvania follows equitable distribution in divorces, not community property, which gives you more flexibility. But I'd still recommend you speak with a family law attorney if you're planning to get married." "I'm considering it, but we're postponing for now." He nodded, unsurprised. "Probably wise to get these structures in place first. Once you're married, things become more complicated legally." We spent the next hour going through forms. My signature appeared on page after page, witnessed by his paralegal who came in with her notary stamp. Articles of organization for Hartley Holdings, LLC. Operating agreement. Resolution establishing a bank account. Forms for the IRS requesting an EIN. "The LLC will be officially established within a few weeks," Morrison said as we finished. "Once it is, the trust can begin the distribution process. That will take another few weeks. There are tax documents to file, transfer procedures to follow. All told, you should have access to the funds within 6 to 8 weeks. 2 months. In that other timeline, I'd had the money within 3 weeks, rushed through the process because I'd been eager to access it, eager to tell Marcus, eager to start planning our future together. This time, the delay felt like a gift. More time to prepare, to plan, to make sure everything was structured correctly before the money became real. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Morrison asked. I hesitated. "Do you know any family law attorneys? Someone who specializes in prenuptial agreements?" "Several. Let me write down some names for you." He pulled out a piece of paper and wrote in careful, the old-fashioned script. 3 names, 3 phone numbers. "These are all excellent attorneys. Tell them I referred you. Thank you. Miss Hartley?" He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Your grandmother would be proud of you, the way you're handling this. Most people your age don't think about protection until it's too late." I thought about that other timeline, when I'd been exactly that person, thoughtless, trusting, convinced that planning for failure was the same as inviting it. "I've learned to be careful. A hard lesson, usually. Yes." I left his office with the folder of paperwork and the list of attorneys, and a feeling that something significant had shifted. The LLC wasn't real yet. It wouldn't be for weeks, but the process was in motion. I'd set something in motion that couldn't be easily stopped. So I created a structure that would protect me whether Marcus understood it or not, whether Diane approved or not, whether anyone else thought I was being paranoid or smart or both. Outside, the afternoon had turned colder. Clouds had rolled in while I was in Morrison's office, gray and heavy with the promise of rain. I walked to my car with my collar turned up against the wind, feeling the weight of the folder in my bag, feeling lighter somehow despite it. My phone showed missed calls, 2 from Diane, 1 from Marcus, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize that were probably wedding vendors wondering about the postponement. I ignored them all and drove instead to the library where I worked, a small branch on the east side of town that served a neighborhood of young families and retirees. The building was quiet when I arrived, just after 3. The afternoon shift was staffed by Emma, a woman in her 50s who'd been working there longer than I'd been alive, and Jake, a recent college graduate who treated the job like it was temporary, even though he'd been there for 3 years. They both looked up when I walked in, Emma's expression neutral, Jake's curious. "Thought you were off today," Emma said. "I am. I just need to use the computer." "Wedding planning?" "Something like that." I settled into one of the public terminals in the corner, the kind we kept for patrons who didn't have internet at home. The chair was uncomfortable, the keyboard sticky from years of use, but the computer was functional. I logged into my new email account, the one only I knew about, and started reading through the information Patricia Joe had sent about investment strategies and asset protection. The material was dense, filled with terms like asset-backed securities and diversified portfolios and tax-advantaged accounts. I read it anyway, slowly, taking notes on a pad I'd brought from home. This was my education now, learning how to manage money, how to protect it, how to make it work for me instead of making myself vulnerable by trusting someone else to handle it. After an hour, Emma came over. "You okay?" I looked up. "Yeah, why? You just seem—" She gestured vaguely. "I don't know. Intense. I'm fine, just doing some research." "For what?" "Financial stuff, investment strategies." Her eyebrows rose. "That's not your usual reading material. I'm trying to educate myself." "About what?" "About how to not be poor." She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Aren't we all?" "You find anything useful?" "Maybe." I gestured to the screen, where a chart showed different investment allocation strategies based on age and risk tolerance. Did you know that most financial advisors recommend keeping at least 60% of your investments in stocks if you're under 30? "I can barely keep $20 in my checking account until payday." "Yeah, well, maybe that's the problem." She studied me for a moment. "You're different today?" "Am I?" "Yeah, like you've made up your mind about something." "Maybe I have." "Marcus, word traveled fast, apparently, among other things. He came by earlier looking for you." "He did?" "Said he needed to talk to you. I told him you weren't working today." "Thanks." He seemed upset. "I'm sure he did." Emma pulled up a chair and sat beside me, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "You want to talk about it?" Did I want to tell someone, anyone, about the strange position I was in, caught between timelines, trying to navigate a future I'd already lived through once? But what would I say? That I was planning my financial life around a divorce that hadn't happened yet from a man I wasn't even married to? That I was protecting myself from mistakes I'd already made in a life I no longer lived? "I'm just trying to be smart," I said finally. "About money, about the future. I never really learned how to manage any of that, and I'm trying to fix that before it becomes a problem." "Because of the wedding?" "Because of everything." She nodded slowly. "My mother always said never depend on anyone else for money. She watched her mother lose everything when my grandfather died because she didn't even know how to write a check. Swore she'd never be that helpless." "Was she?" "Nah, she worked her whole life, saved every penny, retired with enough money to travel wherever she wanted. She's in Portugal right now, actually on some wine tour. Good for her." "Yeah." Emma stood stretching. "Just whatever you're doing, Catherine, make sure you're doing it for yourself, not because someone else thinks you should or shouldn't. You know?" "I know." After she left, I went back to my research. The afternoon passed in a blur of information. Articles about diversification, tutorials on reading financial statements, forums where people discussed their investment strategies with the kind of passion usually reserved for sports or religion. I absorbed it all. Hungry for knowledge I'd never bothered to acquire before, when I'd been too trusting or too lazy or too convinced that someone else would handle the complicated parts. By the time I looked up, the library was closing. Jake was turning off computers. Emma was counting the register. Outside, night had fallen, bringing with it a cold rain that drummed against the windows. "You need a ride?" Emma asked as I gathered my things. "I'm okay. My car's outside." "All right, drive safe." The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my jacket before I'd made it halfway across the parking lot. I ran the last few yards, fumbling with my keys, finally getting the door open and collapsing into the driver's seat with water running down my face and my hair plastered to my head. My phone lit up with a call. Marcus. I stared at it for a long moment, watching his name flash across the screen, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between us. In that other timeline, this was where I would have answered, where I would have listened to whatever he had to say and let him convince me that I was being unreasonable, that postponing the wedding was a mistake, that we could work everything out if I just trusted him. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Then I started the car and drove home through the rain, the wipers barely keeping up with the downpour, the road slick and shining under the streetlights. The radio played quietly, some song I didn't recognize about second chances and starting over. It seemed appropriate. When I got home, Diane's car was in the driveway. Lights were on inside the house. I sat in my car for a moment, steeling myself for whatever conversation was waiting. Whatever speech she'd prepared about my decisions and my future and why I was making a mistake. But when I walked inside, she wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. I found her upstairs, in my mother's old room that we'd never quite known what to do with. She was sitting on the bed, holding something in her hands. A photo album, our mother's, from when we were children. "Hey," I said from the doorway. She looked up, and I saw that she'd been crying. Diane never cried. In all my memories of her, both timelines, both lives, I couldn't remember ever seeing her cry. "Hey," she said, her voice rough. "Sorry, I didn't hear you come in. What are you doing?" "Looking at these?" She gestured to the album. "Mom's pictures. Remember these?" I came into the room and sat beside her on the bed. The photos were old, faded with age, showing two little girls in various stages of childhood. Birthday parties, Halloween costumes, Christmas mornings, our mother in the background of most of them, young and smiling, before the cancer that would eventually kill her had even started growing. "Why are you looking at these?" I asked. "I don't know, She wiped at her eyes. "After we talked earlier, I started thinking about Mom, about how she handled money. She didn't handle it well. No, she didn't. She let Dad manage everything, and then when he left, she was completely lost. Didn't know how to pay bills, couldn't figure out the mortgage, had no idea what was in their accounts or what we owed. It took her years to get it sorted out." I remember. And I swore I'd never be like that. I swore I'd always be in control of my own finances, my own life. That no one would ever have that kind of power over me. "That's why you're so successful." "Maybe, but it's also why I'm alone." She looked at me, and her expression was raw in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm 43 years old, Catherine. I've never been married. I've never even come close. And you know why?" "Why?" "Because I don't know how to let anyone in. I don't know how to trust someone enough to build a life with them. I'm so busy protecting myself that I've built walls no one can climb." "Diane. And when I see you with Marcus, about to get married, building something with someone, I get scared for you. Because I don't want you to end up like Mom, dependent and lost. But I also don't want you to end up like me, so closed off that no one can reach you." I didn't know what to say. This was a Diane I'd never met before. Vulnerable, uncertain, willing to admit that maybe she didn't have all the answers. In that other timeline, she'd been so certain, so sure that she knew what was best for me, so convinced that her way was the only safe way. "I'm trying to find a middle ground," I said finally, "between being dependent and being alone, between trusting too much and never trusting at all." "Is that what you're doing with the postponement? Finding middle ground?" "I'm trying to make sure I don't lose myself, that's all," she nodded slowly. "Okay, then I'll support you, even if I don't understand it, even if I think you're making a mistake, because maybe I don't always know what's best, for you or for anyone else." "Thank you." We sat there for a while longer, looking through the photo album, remembering a time when things were simpler, when the biggest worry was whether we'd get to stay up late or whether there would be cake at dinner. Eventually, Diane closed the album and stood, brushing off her pants. "I'm going to head home," she said. "But Catherine, whatever you decide about Marcus, about the wedding, about any of it, just make sure you're deciding for the right reasons. Not out of fear, not out of anger, but because it's what you really want." "I will." After she left, I stayed in my mother's room, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, thinking about fear and anger and desire, and how hard it was sometimes to tell them apart. Was I postponing the wedding because I was afraid? Or because I was smart enough to see the patterns I'd already lived through once? Maybe both. Maybe that was okay. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Joe. "See you Thursday. Looking forward to working with you." Thursday. 2 days away. One more step in the careful architecture I was building. One more brick in the wall between my past and my future. I texted back, "Me too." Then I went to my room and added Patricia's name to the list I'd started that morning, the growing catalog of people and accounts and structures that would protect me this time around. The list was getting longer. That felt like progress. Patricia Joe's office was nothing like Robert Morrison's. Instead of marble lobbies and expensive art, her firm occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that had only recently started gentrifying. The stairs up were narrow and steep, the walls painted an industrial gray. But when I reached the top and pushed through the glass door into her reception area, I found a space that was warm and welcoming. Comfortable chairs, good lighting, a coffee station with real mugs instead of disposable cups. A young man at the desk looked up as I entered. "Catherine Hartley? That's me. Patricia's ready for you. Through that door, first office on the left." Patricia Joe was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with short dark hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She stood as I entered, extending her hand with a smile that seemed genuine rather than professional. "Catherine, thanks for coming in. Coffee? Please." She poured 2 cups from a French press on the credenza behind her desk, handed me one. The coffee was good. Better than anything I'd been drinking at home. I cradled the mug and settled into one of the chairs across from her desk. "So," she said, sitting and pulling out a legal pad, "you mentioned in your email that you'd be coming into a significant inheritance. Want to tell me more about that?" I walked her through it. My grandmother's trust, the LLC that Morrison was setting up, the roughly $2 million that would be distributed once the paperwork was complete. I didn't mention the other accounts, the ones I'd locked down at the credit union. Those were separate, personal, none of her business yet. Patricia took notes as I talked, occasionally asking questions. How old was I? What was my current income? Did I have any debt? What were my long-term financial goals? I answered as best I could. 24. Roughly $20,000 a year from the library. No debt yet? Though that could change if I got married. As for long-term goals, I want to make sure I'm never dependent on anyone else, I said. I want to have enough money that if something goes wrong, if a relationship falls apart, if I lose my job, whatever, I can take care of myself. She nodded, making another note. That's a good goal. Very practical. Now, $2 million is a significant amount, but it's not infinite. If you want this money to last and to support you long term, we need to think about growth, diversification, risk management. Do you know anything about investing? Not much. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. She pulled out a folder, opened it to reveal charts and graphs. Here's what I typically recommend for someone in your position. For the next hour, she walked me through investment strategies. The basics first, stocks versus bonds, mutual funds versus index funds, the importance of diversification. Then more complex topics, asset allocation based on age and risk tolerance, tax-advantaged retirement accounts, the difference between active and passive management. My head spun trying to keep up, but I took notes, asked questions when something didn't make sense. Patricia was patient, explaining concepts multiple times if needed, drawing diagrams when words weren't enough. The key thing to remember, she said, is that you want your money to work for you. If you just leave $2 million in a savings account, inflation will eat away at its value. But if you invest it smartly, spread across different asset classes, regularly rebalanced, managed with a long-term view, it can grow significantly over time. How significantly? Assuming average market returns of 7 to 8% annually after adjusting for inflation, you could reasonably expect your $2 million to grow to around $6 million over 30 years. Maybe more if you add to it regularly from your income. $6 million. The number felt unreal, impossible. But Patricia said it matter-of-factly, like it was just math, just the natural result of time and compound interest and not touching the money unless absolutely necessary. Of course, she continued, there will be volatility. Markets go up and down. Some years you'll see gains of 20%, other years losses of 10%. The key is not to panic during the downturns, not to try to time the market. Just to stay the course and trust the long-term trajectory. And if I need money for emergencies or whatever, that's why we keep part of your portfolio liquid. Money market funds, short-term bonds, things you can access quickly without having to sell stocks at a bad time. Generally, I recommend keeping 6 to 12 months of living expenses in easily accessible accounts, then putting the rest to work for longer-term growth. She pulled out another chart, this one showing a sample portfolio allocation. 60% in diversified stock funds, 30% in bonds, 10% in cash and cash equivalents. For someone your age, this is a fairly conservative mix. You could be more aggressive if you wanted, 70 or even 80% stocks. But given that this is an inheritance you want to protect, I'd recommend starting here. We can always adjust as we go. What about protecting it from other people? She looked up from her charts. Other people. If I get married, if there's a divorce, I want to make sure this money stays mine. She set down her pen. That's more of a legal question than a financial one, but I can give you general guidance. The fact that you're setting this up as an LLC is smart. It creates a separation between you personally and the assets, but you need to be rigorous about keeping things separate. Don't commingle LLC funds with personal funds. Don't use LLC money to pay for joint expenses or put joint assets in the LLC's name. Keep meticulous records showing that this is your separate property. And a prenup wouldn't hurt. In fact, I'd strongly recommend it. But here's the thing, a prenup is only as good as the records backing it up. If you can show clear documentation that this money came from an inheritance, was placed in a separate legal entity that only you control, and was never mixed with marital assets, most courts will respect that. But you have to be disciplined about it. I can be disciplined. I believe you, she smiled. You strike me as someone who knows what she wants and is willing to do the work to protect it. I've learned the hard way. Most people do. She started gathering her charts, putting them back in the folder. Okay, so here's what I'm proposing. Once your LLC is established and the trust funds are distributed, we'll set up a brokerage account in the LLC's name. I'll help you build a diversified portfolio following the allocation strategy we discussed. We'll meet quarterly to review performance and make any necessary adjustments. And in the meantime, I'd recommend you start educating yourself about investing. Read some books, follow financial news, understand what you're invested in and why. I've been doing some research already. Good. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to money. The more you understand about how markets work, how different investments behave, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions. She paused. Or to recognize when someone else is trying to make uninformed decisions with your money. Is that common? More than you'd think. I've had clients whose partners convinced them to invest in restaurants, nightclubs, cryptocurrency schemes, all sorts of things that ended badly. The person with the money thinks they're being supportive. Maybe thinks they're investing in the relationship. And maybe sometimes it works out, but often, she shrugged. Often it's just a way for one person to access another person's resources. I thought about Marcus, about his opportunities that had sounded so promising, about how in that other timeline I'd trusted him, and it had cost me everything. How do you tell the difference, I asked, between a legitimate investment and someone just trying to access your resources? Patricia considered this. Ask yourself, if this person didn't have access to my money, would they pursue this opportunity anyway? Would they risk their own savings on it? And if the answer is no, if the only reason they're pursuing it is because you can fund it, that's a red flag. What if they don't have savings? But what if they're relying on me to fund things because I'm the one with money? Then you're not investing, you're supporting, and there's a difference. Investing means you both have skin in the game. You both stand to gain or lose. Supporting means you're taking all the risk and they're taking all the benefit. Sometimes that's fine. We support our partners in all sorts of ways, but you should go into it with clear eyes about what it is. Her words settled over me like a weight. In that other timeline, I'd supported Marcus. I'd funded his dreams with my inheritance, convinced that his success would be our success, that we were building something together, but I'd been the only one taking the risk. And when everything fell apart, I'd been the only one left with nothing. "Thank you," I said. "That's helpful." "You're welcome. And Catherine, whatever's going on with your personal life, and I'm guessing there's something, given the questions you're asking, just remember that your financial security doesn't have to come at the expense of your relationships. You can have both. You just have to be smart about boundaries." "I'm working on that." "Good." She stood, extending her hand again. "Let's stay in touch. Once your LLC is established and you have access to the funds, reach out and we'll get started. In the meantime, here's some reading material that might be helpful." She handed me a packet, articles on investing, recommended books, worksheets for calculating expenses, and setting financial goals. I tucked it into my bag alongside Morrison's paperwork and the list of family law attorneys he'd given me. "I'll be in touch," I said. Outside, the day was brighter than it had been, the rain from the night before having washed everything clean. I walked to my car feeling lighter somehow, like the meeting with Patricia had confirmed something I'd been hoping was true, that it was possible to protect yourself without becoming completely isolated, that independence and connection weren't mutually exclusive if you were careful about boundaries. My phone showed another missed call from Marcus and a text. "We really need to talk. Can you meet me tonight?" I stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the keyboard. In that other timeline, I would have said yes immediately. I would have rushed to meet him, eager to smooth things over, to fix whatever I'd broken by postponing the wedding. But that eagerness had been my downfall. The need to make everything okay, to not cause problems, so to be the accommodating partner who never questioned or challenged or insisted on her own needs. This time I typed, "Not tonight. I have things to take care of. Maybe this weekend." His response came immediately. "Catherine, this is important." "So are the things I need to take care of. More important than us." The question hung on my screen, loaded with implications. The old Catherine, the one from that other timeline, would have felt guilty reading it, would have immediately reassured him that of course nothing was more important than us, that she was sorry for being distant, that she'd make time for him right away. This Catherine typed, "Us is important, but so am I. I'll call you this weekend." Then I turned off my phone and drove to the address Morrison had given me for one of the family law attorneys on his list. Sarah Brennan's office was in a renovated Victorian house on a quiet street near the university. The waiting room had probably once been a parlor, with high ceilings and crown molding and windows that let in afternoon light. I checked in with the receptionist and settled into one of the comfortable chairs to wait, pulling up Patricia Joe's packet to read while I had time. 20 minutes later, Sarah Brennan emerged from her office. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with gray hair cut short and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Catherine Hartley? That's me. Come on back." Her office was lined with law books, the kind of heavy leather-bound volumes that were probably more decorative than functional in the age of digital research. But they created an atmosphere of seriousness, of weight. That seemed appropriate for the conversation we were about to have. "Robert Morrison referred you," she said, settling behind her desk. "Said you were looking for someone to help with a prenuptial agreement." "I am. Or I might be. I'm not sure yet." "Not sure about the prenup or not sure about the marriage?" "Both, honestly." She smiled, but it wasn't unkind. "At least you're honest about it. Tell me what's going on." I walked her through the situation, the postponed wedding, the inheritance, my concerns about protecting my assets. I tried to explain it rationally, logically, without revealing the full truth about the timeline I'd already lived through and was trying to avoid repeating. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "First," she said, "good for you for thinking about this before you get married instead of after. I can't tell you how many women I've seen who come in for divorce consultations and discover they have no idea where their money went or how to protect what's left. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Smart. Now, here's the hard part. A prenup is only as effective as both parties' willingness to honor it. If your fiancé isn't on board, if he fights it or resents it, or finds ways to work around it, the protections you put in place won't matter much. So I need him to agree. You need him to genuinely agree. Not just sign because you're pressuring him, not agree with the secret intention of challenging it later. Or there has to be what we call a meeting of the minds, both parties understanding what they're agreeing to and why. And if he won't, then you have a decision to make about whether you want to marry someone who won't respect your need for financial autonomy. The words were blunt, but I appreciated the directness. Sarah Brennan was exactly the kind of attorney I needed. Someone who wouldn't sugarcoat the realities. Who would tell me the truth even when it was uncomfortable? What would a good prenup look like? I asked. For your situation, we'd want to clearly establish that your inheritance is separate property. We'd specify that any appreciation or income generated by that inheritance remains separate. We'd outline what happens to jointly acquired property, your home, if you buy one together, joint bank accounts if you have them, any business ventures you pursue together. We'd establish spousal support parameters, who pays what, under what circumstances, for how long. And that's all legally binding? As long as it's fair to both parties, as long as both parties have adequate time to review it and consult their own attorneys, and as long as neither party is coerced or misled, yes, it's binding. Pennsylvania courts generally uphold prenuptial agreements if they meet those criteria. What counts as coercion? Springing it on someone the day before the wedding, for instance, or threatening to call off the wedding unless they sign, or having them sign without legal representation. Basically, anything that suggests one party didn't truly consent to the terms. So I need to give him time. Let him get his own lawyer. Exactly. I usually recommend at least 30 days between first presenting the agreement and the wedding date. That gives both parties time to think, to consult counsel, to negotiate if needed. 30 days, plus however long it took to draft the agreement in the first place. If we went through with the wedding at all, it would need to be postponed for at least 2 months, maybe longer. Can I see an example? I asked. Of what one of these agreements might look like? Of course. She pulled a file from her drawer, extracted several sheets of paper. This is a sample, not tailored to your specific situation, but it will give you an idea of the structure and language. I read through it slowly, trying to parse the legal terminology. Party of the first part, and heretofore, and in consideration of the mutual promises herein contained. But underneath the formal language, the intent was clear. This is yours. This is mine. This is ours. And here's what happens if we split up. How much does something like this cost? I asked. For a straightforward agreement, probably $3,000 to $5,000. More if there's significant negotiation or complex assets involved. $3,000 to $5,000. In that other timeline, I would have balked at the expense, would have convinced myself it was too much money, that we didn't need it anyway. This time, I saw it as an investment. Cheaper than a divorce, certainly, and infinitely cheaper than losing everything I'd worked to protect. I want to hire you, I said, to draft an agreement. You're sure? Even though you're not sure about the marriage, I'm sure that if I do get married, I want this protection in place first. All right, then. She pulled out a client agreement, explained her fee structure and how the process would work. I'll need some information from you. Your assets, your income, what property you own, what debts you have. And at some point, I'll need the same information from your fiancé. But we can start with your side first. We spent the next hour going through my financial situation in detail. It was strange, laying it all out. The $47,000 in savings, the trust fund that was coming, the LLC that Morrison was setting up. It felt like exposing something private, vulnerable. But Sarah just took notes methodically, asking clarifying questions, never making me feel judged or foolish. When we finished, she had pages of notes, and I had a sense of what the next steps would be. I'll draft something preliminary, she said. Nothing you'd present to your fiancé yet, just a framework we can refine. We'll meet again in a week or so to review it, make changes as needed, and then, if you decide to move forward with the marriage, we can finalize it and present it to him for review. Thank you. One more thing, she said as I stood to leave. This agreement, if you do it, it's going to change the dynamic between you and your fiancé. Money does that. Protection does that. Some men handle it well, understand it for what it is. Others don't. Be prepared for that possibility. I know. Do you? I thought about Marcus in that other timeline, how he'd reacted when I'd finally started asking questions about where our money had gone. Where the trust fund had disappeared to, the hurt in his voice when he'd asked if I didn't trust him, the way he'd made me feel like questioning him was a betrayal of our marriage, of our love, of everything we'd built together. Yes, I said, I know. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening. I sat in my car for a long moment, looking at Sarah Brennan's business card, at Patricia Joe's packet of financial information, at the growing collection of documents and contacts and structures I was building around myself like a fortress. Was this what safety looked like? Attorneys and accountants and carefully worded agreements, separate accounts and LLCs and prenuptial contracts that planned for failure before you'd even begun? Maybe. Or maybe it was just what wisdom looked like after you'd already failed once. I turned on my phone. Some more messages from Marcus, increasingly frustrated. One from Diane asking if I was okay. One from Emma at the library wondering if I was coming in for my shift tomorrow. But none of them felt urgent anymore. None of them felt like emergencies that required immediate response. They were just messages. Things that could wait until I was ready to deal with them. I drove home slowly, taking the long way, watching the neighborhoods change as I moved from downtown back toward the residential areas. Lights were coming on in houses. Families were sitting down to dinner. The world was going about its normal business while I was trying to rewrite my future. When I got home, I made myself dinner, something simple, pasta with butter and garlic, and ate it at the kitchen table while reading through Patricia's materials about investing. The terms were starting to make more sense now. Asset allocation, risk tolerance, dollar cost averaging, small pieces of knowledge that added up to something larger, something that felt like power. My phone rang. Marcus again. This time, I answered. Hey, I said. Finally. Relief in his voice, and underneath it, frustration. I've been calling you all day. I know, I've been busy. Doing what? I could have lied, could have said I was working, or running errands, or just needed space to think, but something made me tell the truth, or at least a version of it. Meeting with lawyers and financial advisors, getting things set up. A pause. What kind of things? The kind of things that protect my inheritance. Another pause, longer this time. From what? From everything. From bad decisions, from being careless, from assuming everything will work out without planning for what happens if it doesn't. Catherine, you're talking like we're already divorced and we're not even married yet. I'm talking like someone who wants to make sure I don't end up helpless if things don't work out the way I hope they will. If you're so sure things won't work out, why are we even having this conversation? It was a fair question. Why was I doing this? Planning a wedding while simultaneously planning for its failure, trying to build a life with Marcus while protecting myself from him. In that other timeline, I would have seen the contradiction and backed down, convinced myself I was being paranoid or unfair. This time, I said, because hope and preparation aren't mutually exclusive. I can hope our marriage works out while still making sure I'm okay if it doesn't. That's not trust, Catherine. I don't even know what that is. It's being smart. It's being suspicious. Maybe, but I'd rather be suspicious and secure than trusting and destroyed. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, revealing more than I'd meant to share. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see him trying to figure out what to say, how to respond to this version of me that he didn't recognize. Finally, what happened to you? You're acting like someone hurt you, but I haven't done anything. Not yet, I thought. You haven't done anything yet, but you will. I've seen it. I've lived through it. And I'm not doing it again? But I couldn't say that. So instead I said, nothing happened to me. I'm just growing up, figuring out who I am and what I need and what I'm not willing to compromise on. And what you need is to treat our relationship like a business transaction? What I need is to make sure I don't lose myself in this relationship, that I have something that's mine, that I can control, that no one can take away from me. I would never take anything from you. In that other timeline, he'd said the same thing. He'd probably even believed it, but believing something and doing something are different, and good intentions don't protect you from bad outcomes. I believe you don't think you would, I said carefully, but things happen, businesses fail, investments go bad, people make mistakes, and I want to make sure that if those things happen, I'm not left with nothing. So, what are you proposing, that we keep everything separate, that we never actually build a life together? I'm proposing that we each maintain some autonomy while still being partners. That we have joint accounts for joint expenses and separate accounts for our individual money. That we support each other without becoming completely dependent on each other. And if I say no, if I say that's not the kind of marriage I want, then we don't get married, I thought. Then we go our separate ways, and I avoid the entire disaster I've already lived through once. But saying it out loud felt too final, too absolute. So instead I said, then we need to figure out what kind of marriage we both want and see if there's a way to make it work. He sighed, long and heavy. Can we please just talk about this in person? Instead of trying to negotiate our entire future over the phone? Okay, when? Tomorrow. I can take the afternoon off work. Tomorrow's fine. Your place or mine? Mine, I said. Neutral ground felt important suddenly, even though this was the house I'd grown up in, the house I shared with Diane. But it was still more mine than his apartment, more familiar, more safe. Okay, I'll see you around 2? 2 works. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, my pasta going cold on the plate, the packet from Patricia Joe open in front of me. Tomorrow I'd have to face Marcus, have to try to explain things I didn't fully understand myself, have to navigate between honesty and revelation. But tonight, I could just sit here in the quiet, in the safety of my mother's kitchen, and let myself feel what I was feeling without having to justify it or explain it or make it make sense to anyone else. Relief, mostly, that I'd made it this far without backing down, that I'd built structures and made plans and set things in motion that would protect me whether the marriage happened or not. And underneath the relief, something else. Something that felt like grief for the person I'd been in that other timeline, young and trusting and so desperate to be loved that I'd given away everything that mattered. I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be, not if I wanted to survive. Marcus arrived at exactly 2 the next afternoon. I watched from the window as he got out of his car, straightened his jacket, took a breath before walking up the path. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. Marcus was usually confident to the point of arrogance, comfortable in any situation, but today his shoulders were tight, his movements careful. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hey," he said. "Hey." We stood there for a moment, 2 people who were supposed to be building a future together, now feeling like strangers. Finally, I stepped back and let him in. The conversation that followed was long and difficult. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd written my list of accounts just days ago, and I tried to explain what I needed. Separate finances, a prenuptial agreement, boundaries that would allow us both to remain whole individuals even while building a life together. Marcus listened. He objected. He argued that this wasn't what marriage was supposed to be, but something had shifted in him too. Maybe he'd talked to Diane and heard her story about their mother. Maybe he'd had time to think about what he really wanted from our relationship. Maybe he'd simply recognized that I wasn't going to back down this time. By the time the afternoon faded into evening, we'd reached an understanding. Not agreement, not yet, but understanding. He would think about what I was proposing. I would wait for his answer. And in the meantime, we'd postpone the wedding indefinitely. "I do love you," he said as he was leaving. "I just don't know if I can be married to someone who doesn't trust me." "And I love you," I replied. "But I can't be married to someone who thinks trust means giving up my autonomy." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we figure out if there's a way to love each other without being married. Or maybe we realize this isn't going to work after all. Maybe." After he left, I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy exactly, not relieved in the way I'd hoped, but clear, like I'd finally said the things that needed saying, set the boundaries that needed setting, claimed the space I needed to survive. 3 weeks later, the LLC was officially established. 4 weeks after that, my grandmother's trust fund was transferred into its account. $2,017,436. More money than I'd ever imagined having, now sitting in an account that only I could access, protected by structures I'd built carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of what could happen if I wasn't careful. Marcus and I kept seeing each other, but we never set a new wedding date. Eventually, 6 months after our original ceremony was supposed to happen, we had another conversation. Quieter, sadder, but no less honest than the first one. We realized that what we wanted from a partnership was too different, that the marriage we'd each imagined couldn't accommodate the other person's needs. We broke up on good terms. No drama, no anger, just two people recognizing that sometimes love isn't enough when the fundamental architecture of a relationship doesn't work. Diane and I grew closer after that. She taught me about her work, about how she'd built her career, about the lessons she'd learned about being a woman with resources in a world that often wanted to take them away. I taught her about letting people in, about finding middle ground between complete independence and complete vulnerability. And the money, my grandmother's gift, stayed protected. I invested it carefully, following Patricia Jo's advice, watching it grow slowly but steadily over the years. I used some of it to buy a small house of my own. Some of it funded further education. Some of it I simply saved, knowing that having options was its own kind of freedom. 10 years later, I would meet someone else. Someone who understood boundaries and autonomy and the difference between partnership and possession. We would marry eventually with a prenuptial agreement that protected both of us, with separate accounts alongside joint ones, with love that didn't require surrender. But all of that was still to come. On that March afternoon when I watched Marcus drive away for what might be the last time, I didn't know any of it yet. I only knew that I'd survived. And that I'd protected myself, that I'd taken the knowledge from one timeline and used it to rewrite another. The evening sun slanted through the kitchen window, painting everything gold. I made myself tea and sat at the table with my laptop, reviewing my financial statements, checking my accounts, taking comfort in the numbers that proved I was okay. I was secure. I was prepared for whatever came next. Outside, the world continued its endless turning. Somewhere, other versions of me were making different choices, living different lives. But in this timeline, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Protected, prepared, whole, and most importantly, free.